She rode 400 miles on a dying horse, no sleep for 3 days, eating hardtack, drinking from streams, always looking over her shoulder. A woman running from a man who burned her father alive and swore she would be next. When she finally collapsed at a stranger's ranch, half dead from exhaustion, she thought she'd found safety. She was wrong, because the man hunting her, he has money, he has hired guns, and he has one terrifying gift: patience. Within weeks, a fire breaks out on the ranch. A poisoned drink nearly kills the foreman, and on her pillow, she finds something impossible. Her mother's brooch, the one she lost 300 miles away. He knows exactly where she is. Now, a hardened rancher who swore never to love again must choose: protect the woman who's awakened something in his frozen heart, or watch history repeat itself. What you'll gain from this story: a powerful reminder that running from your past only delays the inevitable. But standing your ground, even when terrified, is how broken people find their way back to life. If you believe some battles are worth fighting, hit that like button. Comment below. Would you have stayed or run? Share this with someone who needs courage today. And subscribe so you never miss a story that stays with you. Now, let's begin. The dust storm hit without warning. Luke was 3 miles from the ranch house, chasing 15 head of cattle that had spooked during the night. The sky turned brown in minutes. Sand cut into his face like tiny knives. His horse, a gray mare named Smoke, fought against the reins, wanting to bolt. He could not see 20 feet ahead, could not hear anything except the howl of the wind and the panicked lowing of cattle. A smart man would have found shelter, would have let the cattle scatter and counted his losses later. But Luke Carver had not survived 9 years of Wyoming winters by being careful. He had survived by being stubborn, by refusing to let this land beat him the way it had beaten his father. He pushed Smoke forward into the brown wall of wind and sand. 2 hours later, he rode back to Broken Stone Ranch with 12 cattle instead of 15. His face was raw, his eyes burned, his throat felt like he had swallowed half the territory. But he had not quit. He never quit. The ranch appeared through the settling dust. Main house with new shingles he had installed last summer. The barn he had rebuilt after the fire 3 years back. The bunkhouse where his crew slept. And the cookhouse, leaning slightly to the east, looking like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. Luke dismounted and handed Smoke's reins to Tommy Wilson, the youngest hand on the ranch. 19 years old and still green as spring grass, but the boy worked hard and complained little. "I will rub her down good, Mr. Carver," Tommy said. "She looks worn out. We both are." Luke wiped dust from his face with a bandana that was already brown. "Where is Frank?" "Cookhouse, I think. Said he needed to talk to you about something." Luke nodded and walked toward the leaning building, his boots heavy with exhaustion. Whatever Frank wanted to discuss, it could wait until he had eaten something, even if that something was another plate of Pete's cooking, which tasted like saddle leather boiled in dishwater. He pushed open the cookhouse door and immediately regretted it. The smell hit him first: burned beans, scorched coffee, and something else. Something that might have been bacon 3 days ago, but was now a blackened memory. Pete stood at the stove, stirring a pot with the enthusiasm of a man attending his own funeral. 60 years old, weathered as a fence post, and absolutely the worst cook Luke had ever encountered. "Boss," Pete said, not turning around, "beans will be ready in a minute." Luke looked at the pot. The beans were not ready. The beans were dead. They had died sometime in the last hour, and Pete was just stirring their corpse. "I will wait," Luke said. Frank Holloway sat at the long wooden table nursing a cup of coffee that looked thick enough to patch holes in the roof. 62 years old, gray-haired, with a face like cracked leather and eyes that missed nothing. He had been the foreman here when Luke bought the place, and he had stayed on when everyone said the young fool would fail within a year. Frank was the closest thing Luke had to family now. Not that he would ever say that out loud. "We need to talk," Frank said. "About what?" "About losing half our crew in the last 2 months." Luke sat down across from his foreman, his bones aching from the long ride. "We have 6 men. That is enough. It is not enough, and you know it." Frank pushed a tin plate toward him. The plate held something that might have been biscuits. They looked like small rocks covered in flour. "We need 10 hands minimum to work this spread proper, especially with winter coming. So hire more men. I have been trying. Nobody wants to work here." Frank lowered his voice. "Word has gotten around about the food, boss. Pete is a fine wrangler, but he cannot cook worth a damn. The men are eating better at the saloons in town than they do here." Luke picked up one of the biscuits and bit into it. His tooth protested. The biscuit did not yield. He put it back down. "What do you suggest?" Frank reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I placed an advertisement in the Cheyenne newspaper 3 weeks ago. Cook wanted. Room and board. 1 season." "You did what?" "I did what needed doing." Frank unfolded the paper. "And I got a response. A woman." Luke felt his jaw tighten. "No. Boss, listen. No women on the ranch. It is too complicated. More complicated than losing the whole herd because we do not have enough hands come spring." Luke stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I said no. Find another solution." He walked out before Frank could argue further. The evening air was cold now, the dust storm having given way to clear skies and dropping temperatures. Luke walked past the bunkhouse, past the corral, until he reached the horse barn. He stopped at the door. The barn was dark inside, filled with the smell of hay and horse and old wood. He could hear the animals moving in their stalls, the soft sounds of hooves on packed earth. Luke did not go in. He had not entered this barn after dark since he was 19 years old. Since the night he found his father hanging from the center beam, a rope around his neck and a whiskey bottle shattered on the floor below. He never told anyone why he avoided the barn at night. Never explained the cold sweat that broke out on his skin when he got too close to those doors after sunset. Some wounds did not need words. They just needed to be carried day after day, until carrying them became as natural as breathing. Luke turned away from the barn and walked to the main house. He ate cold biscuits for supper that night, washing them down with water from the well. He did not sleep well. He never did. The next morning, Frank found him at the corral checking on a mare that was due to foal any day. "She is coming," Frank said. Luke did not look up. "Who is coming?" "The cook. Sent her a telegram yesterday. She will be here by noon. I told you no, and I told you we cannot survive another winter with Pete poisoning the crew." Frank's voice was firm but not angry. He had known Luke too long to be intimidated by his moods. "1 season, boss. That is what the advertisement said. She comes in October, leaves in March. Strictly business." Luke finally looked. His foreman's face was serious, determined. Frank did not push unless he believed he was right, and Frank was usually right. "1 season," Luke said slowly. "She stays in her own quarters, does her job, does not cause trouble." "Agreed. And no questions. About her or about us. She does her work, I pay her wages, and come spring we are square." Frank nodded. "I will let her know." The rider appeared on the south road just before noon. Luke saw her from the porch of the main house where he had been pretending to repair a saddle while actually watching the road. A woman alone, sitting a rented mare that looked ready to collapse. Even from a distance, he could see the horse was being pushed too hard, ridden too long. The woman herself sat stiff in the saddle, her posture rigid as a fence post. She wore a dark traveling dress covered in dust and a hat that had seen better days. Her face was hidden in shadow, but there was something about the way she held herself, something that spoke of determination and exhaustion in equal measure. As she approached the gate, the mare stumbled. The woman swayed, tried to catch herself, and failed. Luke was running before he knew he had started. His boots pounded the packed earth of the yard as the woman slid sideways off the horse, her body going limp with fatigue. He caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. Her body was slight beneath the heavy traveling dress, her face pale beneath the road dust. Up close, he could see dark hair escaping from pins, gray-green eyes that fluttered open as he held her, and hands that were scarred from work. Those eyes met his, held for a moment, then focused with sudden sharpness. "I am the cook you hired," she said. Her voice was cracked with thirst, rough with exhaustion, but steady. "And I need water, before I die on your land." Luke looked down at the woman in his arms. She was half dead from travel, covered in dust, and probably running from something bad enough to make her ride 300 miles on a worn-out horse. He should send her away. Should tell Frank to find someone else, someone who would not bring complications to his carefully ordered life. But her eyes held something he recognized, something he saw in his own mirror every morning. The look of someone who had lost everything and was still fighting anyway. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so." He helped her to her feet, keeping one hand on her elbow until he was sure she would not fall again. Frank appeared beside them, taking the mare's reins. "I will see to the horse, boss. You get her some water." Luke nodded and led the woman toward the cookhouse. She walked slowly, each step careful and deliberate, as if she was measuring out the last of her strength. At the cookhouse door, she stopped. The building was not much to look at. Warped boards, clouded windows, a stovepipe that tilted at an alarming angle. Inside, he knew, was even worse. Grease on the walls, mice in the corners, Pete's disasters crusted on every surface. She surveyed it all with an expression that gave away nothing. Then she turned to Luke and said 4 words that would echo in his memory for years to come. "This will do fine." She was lying. He could see that clearly. But she was lying with such conviction, such stubborn determination, that he almost believed her. For the first time in years, Luke Carver felt something that was not grief or anger or tired resignation. He felt curious, and that scared him more than any dust storm ever could. Tessa Moran had not slept in 3 days. She had ridden 400 miles on horses she could barely afford to rent, eating hardtack and drinking from streams, always watching the road behind her for signs of pursuit. Now, standing in the doorway of what this rancher called a cookhouse, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The building was a disaster. Grease coated the walls so thick it looked like paint. The stove was rusted and blackened with years of abuse. Something scurried in the corner, too fast to see clearly, but definitely alive. The smell alone was enough to make her eyes water. This was not a kitchen. This was a health hazard wearing a roof. But it was also 300 miles from Clearwater, Nevada. 300 miles from Silas Crane and his cold eyes and his patient, terrifying obsession. 300 miles from the grave of her father, still fresh in the earth. Tessa would have cooked in a pigsty if it meant staying hidden for one more season. She turned to face the rancher, Luke Carver. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was hard, closed off, like a door that had been locked for so long the hinges had rusted shut. She recognized that look. She wore it herself most days. "This will do fine," she said. He did not believe her. She could see that clearly. But he also did not argue. "Drink this first." He handed her a cup of water. "Then we will discuss terms." The water was cool and clean, the best thing she had tasted in days. Tessa forced herself to drink slowly, knowing that gulping would only make her sick. When the cup was empty, she set it down and faced him squarely. "I was told $45 for the season," she said, "plus room and board. That is the offer." "And the room?" He gestured toward a door at the back of the cookhouse. "Used to be the foreman's quarters before we built the bunkhouse. It is small, but it is private. I will need to see it." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she was making demands instead of accepting whatever scraps he offered. "This way," he said. The room was barely larger than a closet. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window that looked east toward the creek. The walls were bare wood, the floor rough planks. But it had a door that locked, and a window that opened, and that was more than Tessa had hoped for. "I will take it," she said. Back in the main room, Luke pulled out a chair at the scarred wooden table. "Sit," he said, "before you fall down." Tessa sat. Her legs were trembling beneath her skirt, but she kept her face calm. Weakness invited questions. Questions invited lies. And she was too tired to lie convincingly right now. The older man, Frank, came in from settling her horse. He moved to the stove and poured coffee into 3 cups, then sat down at the table with them. "Miss Moran," Frank said, "I am Frank Holloway, foreman here. I am the one who placed the advertisement." "I gathered that." Tessa accepted the coffee. It was terrible, bitter and burnt, but she drank it anyway. "We should discuss the arrangement," Luke said. His voice was flat, businesslike. "1 season, October through March. You cook for the crew, keep the cookhouse clean, manage supplies. In exchange, you get your room, your meals, and your wages." "That sounds reasonable. There is one more condition." Tessa's hand tightened on the coffee cup. Here it comes, she thought. The catch, the demand, the price beyond the price. "No questions about the past," Luke said. "Yours or mine. You do your job, I do mine. Whatever brought you here, whatever you are running from, it stays outside that gate." Tessa stared at him. He was not asking for anything improper. He was not making demands that would make her reach for the knife hidden in her collar. He was offering her exactly what she needed: silence, privacy, a place to hide. She wondered what he was hiding from. "That sounds acceptable," she said carefully. "Strictly business. 1 season. 1 season," he agreed. "And one more thing," she waited. "You start earning your pay in 1 week. This cookhouse needs to be cleaned and organized before I waste supplies on it. I will provide materials. You provide the labor." Tessa looked around the filthy room, at the grease-crusted walls, at the rusted stove, at the mice droppings on the floor. "Give me 5 days," she said. "I will have this place ready." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but close to it. 5 days, he agreed. "Frank will show you where to find what you need." He stood up and walked out without another word. Frank waited until the door closed, then turned to Tessa with a half-smile. "Do not take it personal," he said. "He is like that with everyone. I did not expect friendly." "Good. You will not be disappointed." Frank finished his coffee. "But fair warning, miss. Luke Carver is a hard man to know. He has been hurt bad, and he does not let anyone close. If you are looking for warmth, you have come to the wrong place." "I am looking for work," Tessa said. "Nothing more." Frank studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Then you have come to the right place after all." That night, alone in her tiny room, Tessa allowed herself to feel the exhaustion she had been holding back for days. Her body ached in places she did not know could ache. Her hands were blistered from the reins. Her back was one long knot of pain from sleeping on the ground and riding too many hours in bad saddles. But she was alive. She was hidden. She was safe. For now. She unpacked her small carpet bag, laying out the few possessions she had managed to grab before fleeing Clearwater. 2 dresses, both practical. A spare pair of boots, worn but serviceable. A sewing kit. A set of cooking knives wrapped in leather. And at the very bottom, hidden in a false compartment she had sewn herself, a folding knife with a 4-inch blade. Tessa had learned to use it properly 6 months ago, after the first time Silas Crane cornered her behind her father's restaurant. He had not touched her that night. Her elbow to his nose had seen to that. But the look in his eyes when he stood up, blood streaming down his face, had told her everything she needed to know. This was not a man who would accept rejection. This was a man who would destroy anything he could not possess. She hid the knife under her pillow within easy reach. Then she lay down on the narrow bed and listened to the Wyoming wind howling through the gaps in the walls. 300 miles, she told herself. He cannot find you here. You are safe. But sleep was a long time coming. And when it finally arrived, she dreamed of fire. In the main house, Luke sat at his desk staring at nothing. The woman, Tessa Moran, was a mystery. She had the hands of a worker, the posture of a lady, and the eyes of someone who had seen things that left marks invisible to anyone else. She was running from something. That much was obvious. People did not ride 400 miles on dying horses without a good reason. People did not agree to spend 6 months cooking for strangers in the middle of nowhere without being desperate for an escape. He should ask questions, should demand answers, should find out what kind of trouble she might bring to his door. But he had made a deal. No questions about the past. And Luke Carver kept his word, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was stupid. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark yard. The cookhouse was visible from here, a darker shadow against the night sky. A lamp was burning in the small room at the back. She was still awake. So was he. Two people in the darkness, carrying their secrets close, neither one willing to let the other see. Luke turned away from the window and went to bed. He did not sleep well. He never did. Tessa worked like a woman possessed. For 5 days she scrubbed and scoured and organized. She dragged out rusted pots and threw away dishes so crusted with old food they could never be cleaned. She killed mice with traps baited with bacon grease. She swept decades of dirt from corners that had probably never seen a broom. Frank provided the materials as promised. New stovepipe from the general store in town. Glass for the windows to replace the cracked and clouded panes. Whitewash for the walls. Proper cooking equipment to replace Pete's battered disasters. Luke watched from a distance. He told himself he was simply protecting his investment, making sure the woman could actually do what she claimed. But he found himself drifting toward the cookhouse at odd hours, finding excuses to check on supplies or ask questions he already knew the answers to. She worked with an efficiency that bordered on obsession. Every movement was purposeful, every task completed with the same focused intensity she'd shown from the moment she arrived. On the 3rd day, he arrived to find her on the roof. She was crouched near the chimney, wrestling with the new stovepipe, her hair escaping its pins and her face streaked with soot. The old pipe lay on the ground below, rusted through and useless. "What in hell are you doing?" Luke called up, fixing the stovepipe. "What does it look like?" "It looks like you're going to fall off my roof and break your neck. Then maybe you should come up here and help instead of standing there criticizing." He climbed up. The roof was steeper than it looked from below. The old shingles slick with morning dew. Tessa had found a relatively flat section near the chimney, but it was still precarious work. One wrong step, and she would slide right off the edge. "Hold this," she said, shoving one end of the pipe into his hands. "I need to secure the base." She worked quickly, her fingers sure despite the awkward angle. Luke held the pipe steady and tried not to notice how close she was standing, how he could smell soap and wood smoke in her hair, how her shoulder brushed against his arm when she reached for her tools. There. Tessa stepped back to examine her work. "That should hold through winter." "You have done this before." "I have done a lot of things before." Her tone did not invite further questions. They climbed down together. At the bottom, Tessa looked at her hands, now black with soot, and laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. The sound was rusty, like a door that had not been opened in too long, but it was real. "I need to wash before I contaminate my entire kitchen," she said. "Your kitchen," Luke repeated. "For the next 6 months, yes." She met his eyes directly. "Unless you have objections, Mr. Carver." "No objections." "Good." She turned away. "Breakfast will be ready at 6:00 sharp on the 5th day. Tell your men not to be late." The 5th day arrived cold and clear. Tessa had been awake since 4 in the morning, preparing. The cookhouse had been transformed. Whitewashed walls reflected the early morning light. Clean windows let in sunshine for the first time in years. The new stove was black and gleaming, properly seasoned and ready to work. She had laid out the long table with tin plates and cups, arranged with military precision. The coffee was ready, strong and hot. Bacon sizzled in the pan. Biscuits were rising in the oven, golden and perfect. Tessa stood at the stove, her back straight, her hands steady. This was what she knew. This was what she was good at. Whatever else she had lost, whatever else had been taken from her, this remained. She could cook, and cooking well was its own kind of power. The bell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. The men filed in slowly, cautiously, like they expected a trap. Pete came first, looking sheepish. Then Miguel Santos, a Mexican vaquero with quick eyes and quiet ways. Then the others, young hands and old, all of them dusty and tired and expecting another plate of Pete's disasters. They stopped dead in the doorway. Tommy Wilson recovered first. He walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. His eyes were wide. "Ma'am," he said carefully, this smells real good." Tessa set a plate in front of him. Biscuits golden and fluffy, bacon crisp and perfect, eggs fried exactly the way a hungry man wanted them. The boy stared at the food like it was a miracle. "Eat," Tessa said. "There is plenty more." The others rushed to the table. For the next half hour, the only sounds were forks scraping plates and men asking for seconds and thirds. Miguel closed his eyes after the first bite of eggs and said something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. Pete ate 3 biscuits without speaking, then looked at Tessa with something approaching awe. Luke arrived late. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the transformed room, the satisfied crew, the woman at the stove who had made it all happen. Then he walked to the table, sat down, and accepted the plate she handed him. He ate without comment. When the plate was empty, he set down his fork and looked at her. "That will do," he said quietly. From Luke Carver, Tessa would learn later, those 3 words were practically a love letter. After breakfast, the men scattered to their work. But not before every single one of them thanked Tessa personally. Tommy actually bowed, which made her smile. Miguel tipped his hat and said something about angels in disguise. Even Pete, whose cooking she had effectively declared unfit for human consumption, shook her hand and told her the ranch was lucky to have her. Frank stayed behind to help with the dishes. "You have made some friends this morning," he said, drying plates while she washed. "I made some food, that is all." "No, miss, that is not all." Frank set down the plate he was drying. "You have to understand something about this place. These men work hard, 12, 14 hours a day. They sleep in a bunkhouse that is barely warmer than the barn. They spend months away from their families, if they have families at all. A good meal is not just food to them. It is—" he searched for the word. "It is home, or the closest thing they have got to one." Tessa did not know what to say to that. "You have given them something they have been missing," Frank continued. "Do not underestimate how much that matters. I'm just doing my job. Maybe." Frank smiled, the expression softening his weathered face. "But you are doing it damn well." That afternoon the weather turned. It had been clear in the morning, but by noon dark clouds were piling up on the western horizon. By 2 o'clock the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. By 3, snow was beginning to fall. Luke called the crew in early. "Storm coming," he told Frank. "A bad one by the look of it. We need to get the cattle into the sheltered pastures before it hits." The next 2 hours were chaos. Men riding out in all directions, rounding up cattle that did not want to move. Snow falling harder by the minute. Wind picking up until it was difficult to see, difficult to hear, difficult to do anything except keep moving. Tessa watched from the cookhouse window, helpless. She had been ordered to stay behind, to keep the fire burning and the coffee hot for when the men returned. It was sensible, practical. She was not a ranch hand. She did not know the land. But watching Luke ride out into that white wall of snow, something tightened in her chest that she did not want to examine too closely. Tommy had stayed behind with her. His horse had thrown a shoe that morning and was not fit to ride. He sat at the table, restless and unhappy, watching the storm through the window. "They will be all right," Tessa said. "They have done this before." "I know." Tommy drummed his fingers on the table. "I just hate being stuck here while everyone else is out there working." Tessa understood that feeling all too well. An hour later, Tommy went to check on the horses in the barn. 10 minutes after that, Tessa heard the scream. She ran out into the snow without thinking, without grabbing a coat, following the sound to the barn. The door was open, swinging in the wind. Inside, she found Tommy on the ground, curled around himself, blood streaming from a gash on his temple. A horse stamped nervously in the stall behind him. The animal was wild-eyed, scared, its rear hooves dark with something that might have been mud or might have been blood. "Tommy." Tessa dropped to her knees beside him. "Tommy, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. "The horse," he gasped. "Spooked. Kicked me." Tessa ran her hands over his body, checking for injuries. The head wound was bleeding badly, but head wounds always did. More concerning was the way he was clutching his ribs, the shallow breathing that suggested something might be cracked. "I need to move you," she said. "Can you stand?" "Think so." She got him to his feet, half carrying him across the yard to the cookhouse. The snow was blinding now, the wind so strong she could barely keep her footing. By the time they made it through the door, they were both soaked and shivering. Tessa lowered Tommy onto the cot she had set up near the stove. She stripped off his wet shirt, ignoring his protests, and began examining his injuries. The gash on his temple needed stitches. She could do that. She had learned how in nursing school, back in another life, before Silas Crane and fire and running. The ribs were bruised, maybe cracked, but probably not broken. She could bind them, keep him still, watch for signs of internal bleeding. The concussion was the real concern. He had hit his head hard. She needed to keep him awake, keep him talking, make sure his brain was not swelling inside his skull. Tessa worked quickly, efficiently, using skills she had not used in months. She stitched the wound with steady hands. She bound his ribs with strips of clean cloth. She made him drink water, made him answer questions, made him count backwards from 100 whenever his eyes started to drift closed. "What is your name?" "Tommy Wilson." "Where are you from?" "Nebraska." "Little town called Broken Bow." "Tell me about it. Tell me about your family." He talked, haltingly at first, then with more animation as she prodded him with questions. His mother's apple pie, his father's bad jokes, his younger sister who wanted to be a school teacher, the girl back home who had promised to wait for him. Tessa listened and cooked and watched. She made soup from the supplies in the pantry. She kept the fire burning high. She checked Tommy's pupils every 15 minutes, watching for signs of trouble. The storm raged on outside, and Luke Carver did not return. It was nearly midnight when the door finally opened. Luke came in first, followed by Frank and the others. They were covered in snow, their faces red with cold, their movements slow with exhaustion. They had saved the cattle, all of them, but it had taken everything they had. Luke saw Tommy on the cot, saw the bandages, the stitches, the careful way the boy was propped up on pillows. Then he looked at Tessa. She was standing at the stove, ladling soup into bowls. Her dress was spotted with blood, some of it Tommy's, some of it hers from where she had cut her hand on a piece of broken equipment. Her hair had come completely undone, falling around her shoulders in dark waves. She looked exhausted. She looked fierce. She looked like something out of a story he did not know how to tell. "What happened?" he asked. "Horse kicked him." Tessa handed him a bowl of soup, head wound and bruised ribs. "I stitched him up and bound the ribs. He will be fine, but he needs to rest for a few days." Luke looked at the stitches on Tommy's temple. They were perfect, small even, professional. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. Tessa's hands stilled on the soup ladle. For a moment she did not answer. "Our deal said no questions about the past," she said finally. "You are right. It did." Luke sat down at the table and began to eat his soup. It was perfect, hot and savory, and exactly what a frozen man needed after hours in a blizzard. The other men crowded around the table, eating in grateful silence. Finally, Luke looked up. "Thank you," he said, "for Tommy." Tessa met his eyes. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. "You are welcome," she said quietly. And something cracked open between them. Just a little, just enough to let the light in. 2 weeks passed. The cookhouse became the heart of Broken Stone Ranch. Men who had eaten in sullen silence now lingered after meals, talking and laughing and trading stories. The coffee pot was always full, the fire was always warm, and Tessa Moran was always there, quiet and capable, and somehow essential in ways no one could quite explain. She learned their rhythms. Frank liked his coffee strong enough to strip paint. Old Pete could not stomach onions in anything. Miguel missed the spices of his homeland, so she started adding peppers to his portions. Tommy had a sweet tooth like a child, so she made sure there was always something sugary waiting for him after supper. And Luke. Luke was harder to read than any of them. He came to every meal but rarely spoke. He ate whatever she put in front of him without comment, his face revealing nothing. But she caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she was not looking. And she caught herself watching back. It was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. She had not come here to feel things for a hardened Wyoming rancher with storm cloud eyes. She had come to hide, to survive, to stay invisible until it was safe to move again. But Luke Carver had a way of making her feel seen. The supply run came on a Tuesday. Frank's back had been bothering him for days. Miguel was down with a fever that Tessa was treating with willow bark tea. There was no one else available. "You will have to come with me," Luke told her at breakfast. "I need someone to manage the list and help load the wagon." "I can ride," Tessa said. "I know. I have seen you." Something in his tone made her look up sharply, but his face was as closed as always. "We leave in an hour," he said, and walked out. The ride to town was 15 miles each way, over rough roads that jarred every bone in her body. The wagon was old but sturdy, pulled by 2 draft horses that knew their way without much guidance. For the first hour, they did not speak. Tessa watched the landscape roll past, brown grass and gray rock and the occasional stand of pine trees. The sky was clear and blue and enormous, stretching to the horizon in every direction. In Nevada, the desert had felt oppressive, empty and hostile and waiting to swallow you whole. Here, the emptiness felt different, peaceful almost, like there was room to breathe. "How long have you owned the ranch?" she asked finally. Luke did not answer immediately. She thought he might ignore the question entirely. 9 years, he said at last. "Bought it when I was 19. That is young. I did not have much choice." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "My father left debts when he died. The ranch was all that was left. Sell it or save it, those were my options. You chose to save it. I am stubborn." Tessa smiled despite herself. "I noticed." They fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. Easier. The kind of silence between people who were beginning to understand each other. The town was called Carterville. It was not much, a main street with a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other buildings that seemed to be holding themselves together through sheer determination. Luke handled the supply list with efficiency, loading the wagon while Tessa checked items off and made sure nothing was forgotten. The general store owner was a thin man with curious eyes who asked too many questions about the new cook at Broken Stone. Luke shut him down quickly. "She works for me. That is all you need to know." When they left town, the sun was already starting to set. "We should have started earlier," Tessa said, watching the sky turn orange. "We will make it." They were 5 miles from the ranch when the road was blocked. 3 men on horseback spread across the trail. They were rough-looking, unshaven, with the hungry eyes of men who took what they wanted and did not ask permission. Luke pulled the wagon to a stop. "Evening, gentlemen," he said. "Gentlemen." His voice was calm, almost pleasant. But Tessa saw his hand drift toward the gun at his hip. "Evening yourself," the lead man said. He was older than the others, with a scar across his chin and a smile that showed too many teeth. "That is a nice loaded wagon you got there. Lot of supplies. Supplies for my ranch." "Thing is," the man continued, "we have been riding a long way. We could use some supplies ourselves. Maybe you could share." Luke's hand closed around his gun. "Maybe you could move along before this gets unpleasant." The man's smile widened. 3 against 1. Those are not good odds, friend. You are right. Luke drew his gun in a motion so fast Tessa barely saw it happen. They are terrible odds. For you. The silence stretched tight as a wire. Tessa's hand was on the knife in her boot. She had not consciously reached for it, but there it was, her fingers wrapped around the handle, ready to draw. The lead man looked at Luke's gun, looked at the steady hand holding it, looked at Luke's eyes, which held absolutely no fear. "All right," the man said slowly. "No need for trouble. We will just be moving along. Good idea." The three men rode past the wagon, giving it a wide berth. The lead man glanced at Tessa as he passed. "Pretty cook you got there," he said. "Better keep an eye on her." Luke did not respond. He just watched them go, gun still drawn, until they disappeared around a bend in the road. Then he holstered the weapon and picked up the reins. They rode in silence for a while. Tessa's heart was still pounding, her hand still gripping the knife. "That was fast," she said finally. "Your draw. Wyoming does not forgive weakness. Neither does anywhere else." Luke glanced at her hand still resting on her boot. "That knife you have been holding," he said. "You know how to use it?" "Well enough." "Good." Something passed between them in that moment. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. Two people who knew what it meant to fight. They arrived at the ranch after dark. Frank met them at the gate, lantern in hand. "Everything all right?" he asked, eyeing their faces. "Fine," Luke said. "Some trouble on the road, but nothing serious." They unloaded the wagon in silence. When it was done, Tessa walked to the cookhouse to check on the supplies she had brought back. Her room was exactly as she had left it that morning. Bed made, clothes put away, everything in its place. Except for one thing. On her pillow, catching the lamplight, was a small silver brooch. Tessa's breath stopped. She knew that brooch. It had been her mother's, passed down on her 16th birthday, the most precious thing she owned. She had been wearing it the night she fled Clearwater. She had lost it in the dark, running through the streets, not stopping to look back. That was 300 miles away. That was 8 months ago. Now it was here, on her pillow, in a place no stranger should have been able to reach. Her hands shook as she picked it up. There was no note, no explanation, just the brooch, cold and heavy in her palm. "He knows where I am." She checked the lock on her door, checked it again, checked the window, the corners, every shadow that might hide a threat. Nothing. She was alone. But she did not feel alone. She felt watched, hunted, found. Tessa sat down on her bed, clutching the brooch so hard it bit into her skin. 300 miles had not been far enough. Nowhere would be far enough. In the main house, Luke could not sleep. He kept thinking about the ride back from town, about the way Tessa had reached for her knife, instant and sure, about the fear he had seen flash across her face when those men blocked the road. She was running from something. He had known that from the moment she arrived. But now he was beginning to understand that whatever she was running from was not just bad. It was dangerous. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark yard. The cookhouse was visible from here, a shadow against the night sky. The lamp in Tessa's room went out, then came back on, then went out again. Something was wrong. Luke stood at the window for a long time, watching, waiting, wondering if he should go to her, ask what had happened, offer help. But she had not asked for help, and he did not know how to offer it. Not yet. So he stayed at the window, watching over her from a distance, until the lamp finally stayed dark and the night settled into silence. The fire started at 3 in the morning. Tessa woke to shouting. She was on her feet before she was fully conscious, her hand already reaching for the knife under her pillow. "Fire!" someone was yelling. "Fire at the east fence!" She ran outside in her nightgown, bare feet stinging against the cold ground. The sky to the east was orange, flames licking up from the dry grass near the property line. The men were already running toward it, carrying buckets, shovels, anything that might help. Luke was in the lead, his shirt half-buttoned, his face grim in the firelight. Tessa grabbed a bucket and followed. They fought the fire for 2 hours. It was not large, contained to a single patch of grass and brush, but the wind kept shifting, threatening to spread it further. By the time the last flames were out, everyone was covered in soot and ash, their hands blistered, their lungs burning. Frank stood at the edge of the blackened ground, frowning. "This was not natural," he said. "Look at this." He pointed to a pile of charred brush. "Someone stacked this here, built it up deliberate, then lit it." Luke's face went hard. "Who?" Frank shook his head. "No way to tell. But this was a message, boss. Someone wanting us to know they can reach us whenever they want." Tessa stood a little apart from the others, staring at the flames that were not there anymore. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Fire. Always fire. She remembered the night her father died, the orange glow on the walls, the smell of smoke and lamp oil, her father's voice, shouting for her to run, to get out, to go. She had run. He had not. Luke was watching her. She could feel his gaze like a physical weight. "Miss Moran." His voice was quiet, meant for her alone. "You look like you have seen a ghost. Maybe I have." Later, when the sun was up and the crew had scattered to their work, Luke found Tessa in the cookhouse. She was sitting in the dark, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. The fire in the stove had gone out. The room was cold and still. Luke sat down across from her without speaking. They stayed that way for a long moment. Two people in the silence, each carrying their own weight. "Tell me," Luke said finally. "It is not your problem. Someone set a fire on my land. That makes it my problem." Tessa looked up at him. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying. She looked tired, defeated, old in ways that had nothing to do with years. "There is a man," she said. "His name is Silas Crane." She told him everything. The silver mine in Clearwater, the wealthy superintendent who decided she belonged to him, her refusal, his persistence, turning from attention to obsession to threat, her father standing up for her, protecting her, dying for her. She told him about the fire, about the sheriff who called it an accident, about running in the night with nothing but a knife and a few coins, knowing she could never go back. When she finished, Luke did not speak for a long time. She expected him to tell her to leave, expected him to calculate the danger, weigh the cost, decide she was not worth the trouble. Instead, he asked, "How many men does Crane have?" She blinked. "What? How many men does he have? Hired guns, people who do his dirty work." "I do not know exactly. 6, maybe more." Luke nodded slowly, processing. "And he found you here. That is what the brooch was. That is what this fire is." "Messages, yes. So he knows where you are. He is letting you know he knows. Trying to scare you into running again." "Yes." Luke leaned back in his chair and looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. "Are you going to run?" Tessa thought about it. Thought about packing her bag, climbing on a horse, disappearing into the vast, empty West. She had done it before. She could do it again. But she was so tired of running. "No," she said. "Not this time." "Good." Luke stood up. "Because you are one of mine now, Tessa. Whatever that means. Wherever it leads. Crane wants you. He goes through me. One of mine." The words hit her like a fist to the chest. No one had claimed her like that since her father died. No one had stood between her and danger, not because they wanted something from her, but because they thought she was worth protecting. "Why?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the word. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because I know what it is like to be hunted," Luke said quietly. "By grief, by fear, by the things you cannot outrun no matter how far you go. And I know what it is like when someone finally says, 'You can stop running now, you are safe.'" He met her eyes directly. "You are safe here, Tessa. I promise you that. She believed him. That night, Luke called a meeting. Frank, Tessa, Miguel, and Tommy gathered in the main house. Luke explained the situation in blunt terms. There was a man coming, a dangerous man with money and resources and no conscience. He wanted Tessa. He would hurt anyone who got in his way. "Any of you want to leave," he said. "I will not hold it against you. This is not your fight." No one moved. "With respect, boss," Miguel said, "we do not run from trouble on this ranch. Never have." "That is right," Frank agreed. "Miss Moran is one of ours. Anyone comes for her, they come for all of us." Tommy just nodded, his young face set with determination. Tessa felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Thank you," she said, "all of you." Luke outlined the new rules. No one goes anywhere alone. Night watches doubled. Tessa stays close to the main buildings at all times. Anyone sees a stranger on the property, they report it immediately. "And if they come in force," Frank asked. "Then we will be ready," Luke said. After the others left, Luke stopped Tessa at the door. "You should try to sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "I cannot sleep." She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see fire." Luke hesitated. Then he did something that surprised her. "Come with me," he said. He led her to the porch of the main house, where two wooden chairs faced out toward the dark yard. He sat down in one and gestured for her to take the other. Then he picked up the rifle leaning against the wall and laid it across his knees. "I will keep watch," he said. "You sit here with me. You do not have to sleep. You just have to know you are not alone." Tessa sat down beside him. They did not speak. They did not need to. They just sat together in the darkness, two people who had finally stopped running, watching the night for whatever might come. 3 weeks after the fire at the boundary, the worst blizzard in a decade swept down from the mountains. The warnings came from town, carried by riders who looked half-frozen themselves. "Big storm coming," they said. "Maybe the biggest in years. Get your animals to shelter and stay inside." Luke pushed the crew hard for 2 days, moving cattle into the protected pastures, reinforcing fences, stockpiling firewood. By the time the storm hit, they had done everything possible to prepare. It was not enough. The blizzard arrived faster and harder than anyone expected. Within an hour, visibility dropped to nothing. Within 2 hours, the temperature had fallen so far that exposed skin turned white in minutes. Most of the cattle were safe. But a small group, maybe 20 head, was still in the far north pasture, 3 miles from the ranch house, 3 miles through a wall of white death. Luke pulled on his heaviest coat. "I will go," he said. "Rest of you stay here." Frank grabbed his arm. "Boss, that is suicide. You cannot see 20 feet in this. Those cattle die. We do not make it through winter." Luke shook off his grip. "Keep the fires burning. I will be back." He rode out into the white. Tessa watched him go. She stood at the cookhouse window, her hands pressed against the cold glass, watching the dark shape of horse and rider disappear into the blizzard. "Come back," she whispered. "Please come back." An hour passed, then 2. The storm grew worse. Wind howled around the buildings, finding every crack and gap. Snow piled up against the doors, against the windows, burying the world in white. Luke did not return. "He should be back by now," Tessa said. Frank was sitting at the table, his face gray with worry. "He knows the land. He will find shelter. Or he is hurt out there, freezing to death while we sit here doing nothing." "Miss Moran," Frank started, but Tessa was already pulling on her coat. "I am going after him. That is crazy. You will die out there. Then we will both die. But I am not sitting here wondering." She grabbed a rope, a blanket, and a lantern. At the door, she looked back at Frank. "If I am not back by morning," she said, "send someone to look for us." Then she stepped into the white. The blizzard was worse than anything she had ever experienced. The wind hit her like a physical force, nearly knocking her off her feet. Snow drove into her face, her eyes, her lungs. She could not see anything except white. could not hear anything except the scream of the wind. She should have been lost immediately, should have wandered in circles until she collapsed. But something guided her, instinct, maybe, or desperation, or something else she could not name. She found Luke's horse first. The animal was standing in a small hollow, partially sheltered from the wind. Its sides were heaving, its eyes wild with fear. When Tessa approached, it shied away, then seemed to recognize her, and calmed. She followed the tracks leading away from the horse. 50 yards on, she found him. Luke was half buried in snow, his body curled around itself for warmth. His face was pale, his lips blue, his eyes closed. For one terrible moment, she thought he was dead. Then he groaned. "Luke." Tessa dropped to her knees beside him. "Luke, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, confused. "Tessa?" "I am here. I am going to get you out of this." He was too heavy for her to lift, but she managed to drag him upright, get his arm over her shoulders, half carry him toward the nearest shelter she could see, the old barn at the edge of the property. It was not much, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was out of the wind. She got him inside, got blankets around him, got a fire started in the ancient stove that sat in one corner. Then she wrapped her body around his and held on. Luke drifted in and out of consciousness. He was cold. So cold. His thoughts moved slowly, like they were frozen too. But there was warmth against him. Soft warmth. A voice speaking, keeping him anchored to the world. "Stay with me. Stay awake. Talk to me." He tried to talk. His lips would not cooperate. The warmth pressed closer, arms around him, breath against his neck. "You are safe. I have got you. Stay with me." He knew that voice, knew those arms. "Tessa." He tried to say her name, managed only a croak. "Shh, save your strength. Just stay awake." He fought to keep his eyes open, but the darkness was pulling at him, seductive and peaceful. It would be so easy to let go, to drift away into the cold. Then he realized where he was. The barn. He was in a barn. The panic hit like a lightning strike. No, no, not here. Cannot be here. The barn. My father. I found him. I found him in the barn. He was thrashing, fighting, trying to get away from the walls that were suddenly pressing in on him. "Luke." Tessa's voice cut through the panic. "Luke, look at me. Look at me." Her hands on his face, her eyes gray-green and steady, filling his vision. "This is not that barn. This is not that night. Your father is not here. Just me. Just you. You are alive. You are safe." He was shaking, could not stop shaking. "Tell me," Tessa said. "Tell me what happened." And somehow, in the darkness of that freezing barn, he found himself telling her about his father, about the drinking and the grief that followed his mother's death, about coming home one evening, 19 years old, finding the barn door swinging open in the wind, about what hung from the center beam, about the note that said only, "I am sorry, son. I could not live without her." When he finished, he was crying. He had not cried in 9 years, had not let himself feel anything that might crack open the walls he had built. But Tessa held him through it, held him, and did not let go. "That was his choice," she said quietly, "not yours. You could not have saved him." "I know." Luke's voice was ragged. "But sometimes knowing is not the same as believing." "I understand." She rested her forehead against his. "More than you know." They stayed like that through the night, wrapped around each other, keeping each other warm, keeping each other alive. When dawn came, the storm had passed. Frank found them in the morning. Luke was weak but alive. Frostbite on his fingers and toes, nothing that would not heal. Bruised ribs from the fall, a headache that would last for days. But he was alive. Because of her. Later, when he had been warmed and fed and fussed over by the crew, Luke found Tessa in the cookhouse. She was at the stove making soup, her movements slow and tired. "You could have died out there," he said. "So could you. Why did you come?" We are just a business arrangement. Tessa set down the ladle and turned to face him. Because I cannot lose anyone else, she said. Her voice broke on the words. Do you understand that? I cannot. Luke stepped closer. She did not move away. I have spent 10 years, he said quietly, making sure I never needed anyone. How is that working for you? It was working fine. Until you showed up on that worn-out mare and made me remember what it felt like to want something. He kissed her. It was not gentle, not tentative. It was desperate. Fierce. Two people who had been alone for too long finally finding each other. When they broke apart, Tessa was trembling. This is a mistake, she whispered. Probably. It will only make everything more complicated. I know. Neither of them stepped away. That evening, a rider appeared on the South Road. He carried a letter. It was addressed to Tessa. There was no return address, but she recognized the handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, one line. Your father's grave looks lovely this time of year. I visit often. When will you come home? The letter was not signed. It did not need to be. Tessa showed Luke the letter. They stood in his study, the fire burning low, the letter lying between them like a coiled snake. He has been to my father's grave, Tessa said. Her voice was steady, but Luke could see her hands trembling. He is taunting me. He wants you scared, wants you to run again. Maybe I should. Before someone else gets hurt. Luke took her hands in his. They were cold, shaking. You run, and he wins. You stay. We fight. Your choice. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket. I am done running. The next few days passed in tense preparation. Luke increased security around the ranch. Armed patrols at night, locked gates during the day. No one went anywhere alone, not even to the outhouse. He rode to town to speak with the sheriff, but the man was conveniently unavailable. When Luke pressed the matter, the deputy just shrugged. Sheriff is busy, the deputy said, but he said to tell you that if you have got troubles, maybe you should not bring troubled people onto your land. Luke rode home with murder in his heart. 3 days later, Frank collapsed during breakfast. One moment he was reaching for the coffee pot. The next he was on the floor, vomiting, his face gray, his body shaking with fever. Tessa was beside him instantly, her nursing training taking over. Frank, can you hear me? His eyes were unfocused, his breathing shallow. Poison, Tessa said. Something he ate. Not from my kitchen. What did he eat in town? Tommy spoke up, his voice scared. He stopped at the saloon yesterday. Said a stranger bought him a drink. Tessa's face went hard. Help me get him to his bed. They carried Frank to the foreman's quarters in the bunkhouse. For the next 12 hours, Tessa did not leave his side. She made him drink water, forced charcoal down his throat to absorb the poison, kept him warm when he shook with chills, and cool when he burned with fever. By morning, the worst had passed. Frank was weak, barely able to lift his head, but he was alive. Crane, Tessa said to Luke, her voice flat. He is sending a message. Anyone close to me is a target. Then we send a message back. While Frank recovered, he told Luke something he had kept secret for 15 years. Your mother gave me something before she died, Frank said. His voice was weak, but his eyes were clear. Told me to keep it till you found someone worth giving it to. He reached under his pillow and produced a small package wrapped in cloth. Luke opened it carefully. Inside was a simple silver ring and an old photograph. The photograph showed 2 men standing in front of a small restaurant. One of them was Luke's father, young and healthy, smiling at the camera. The other was a stranger with kind eyes and dark hair. The sign above the door read, Moran's Kitchen. Luke's breath caught. That is Henry Moran, Frank said. Your father bought horses from him, 15 years back. They were friends. Luke stared at the photograph. At his father's face, so different from the broken man he remembered. At the stranger who shared Tessa's features. "It was not chance," he said slowly. "Tessa coming here. It was fate." "Maybe so." Frank closed his eyes. "Maybe some things are meant to be." Luke found Tessa in the cookhouse and showed her the photograph. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers tracing the outline of her father's face. "He never told me," she whispered. "I had no idea. Neither did I." Luke sat down beside her. "But it means something. You coming here?" It was not random. Tessa set down the photograph and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "He looks so happy," she said. "So young, so does mine." They sat together in silence, sharing grief, sharing understanding, sharing something that went deeper than words. The next morning, a messenger arrived from town. He carried an official-looking envelope containing 2 documents. The first was a legal offer to purchase Broken Stone Ranch for 3 times its actual value. The second was a personal letter. Luke read the letter aloud. "Mr. Carver, I understand you have been sheltering something that belongs to me. Sell me the ranch and deliver the woman, and you will be a rich man. Refuse, and you will discover how many unfortunate accidents can happen on a remote property. You have 1 week." The letter was signed, Silas Crane. Luke read it once. Then he walked to the fireplace and threw it into the flames. "What are you going to do?" Tessa asked. Luke watched the paper burn. "I am done waiting for him to pick us apart," he said. "We take the fight to him." That night, Luke gathered his most trusted men. There was an abandoned mining operation called Dawson Mill, 5 miles south of the ranch. According to information Luke had gathered in town, Crane's hired guns had been gathering there. "We hit them first," Luke said. "Take out his muscle. Then we deal with Crane himself." "What about evidence?" Frank asked. He was still weak, propped up in a chair, but refusing to be left out of the planning. "We cannot just shoot the man, no matter how much he deserves it. We have evidence." Luke looked at Tessa. "Tell them." Tessa reached into her pocket and pulled out a half-burned piece of paper. "I found this in my father's belongings," she said. "Things that were sent from Clearwater after I left. It is a letter my father wrote, documenting Crane's threats. He hid it before the fire, hoping someone would find it. The letter was damaged, but the words were clear enough. Threats, demands, promises of violence if Tessa did not comply. Combined with testimony from Crane's men, Luke said, that should be enough for the territorial court." Frank nodded slowly. "When do we move?" 3 days, Luke said. "Give the men time to prepare. And Frank, I need you to stay here. Guard the ranch. Boss, I can ride. You can barely sit up." Luke's voice was firm, but not unkind. "I need someone I trust to watch over things while we are gone." Frank grumbled, but he did not argue. 3 days, Luke repeated. "Then we end this." The night before they rode, Luke found Tessa standing on the porch, looking up at the stars. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "I was wondering when you would find me," she said. "Could not sleep. Neither could I." They stood together in silence for a moment, the cold night air sharp and clean around them. "If this goes wrong," Luke started. "It will not. If it does, I need you to know." He took her hand. "These past weeks, with you, I have not felt like this since." "I do not know if I have ever felt like this." Tessa stepped closer to him. "Tell me after," she said. "When we have won. Give me something to look forward to. That is a promise." She kissed him long and deep, like she was trying to memorize the feel of his lips. Then she stepped back. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." They rode out before dawn. Luke, Miguel, Tommy, and 2 other trusted hands. Tessa came too, despite Luke's objections. "Crane killed my father," she said. "I have a right to see this end." Luke knew he could not stop her, was not sure he wanted to. Dawson Mill was everything Luke expected and worse. The abandoned mining operation sprawled across a narrow valley, a collection of crumbling buildings and rusted equipment that had not been used in years. Perfect place for an ambush, perfect place to hide. Luke's plan was simple. Approach from two directions, catch Crane's men in a crossfire, end it quick. But Crane's men were waiting. The first shot came from the tallest building, splintering wood near Luke's head. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire everywhere, muzzle flashes in the gray pre-dawn light. Shouts and screams and the whine of bullets passing too close. Luke threw himself behind a pile of old mining equipment, his gun already in his hand. He returned fire, saw one man fall, then another. Miguel was to his left, his rifle cracking steadily. Tommy was somewhere to the right, young and scared but holding his position. But something was wrong. "They knew we were coming," Miguel shouted. "Someone warned them." Luke cursed. He had suspected there might be a leak. Someone in town, maybe, bought by Crane's money. It did not matter now. They were committed. "Push forward," he yelled. "We have got them outnumbered." They advanced building by building, clearing each one with brutal efficiency. Luke had not fought like this since his younger days, when the territory was wilder and men settled disputes with lead instead of lawyers. He had not forgotten how. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, most of Crane's hired guns were dead or surrendering. But two of them had slipped away, heading toward the back of the mill, toward where Tessa was supposed to be hiding. Tessa saw them coming. Two men running through the debris, guns in their hands. They had not seen her yet, hidden in the shadow of a collapsed building. She had a choice. She could stay hidden, let them pass, stay safe like Luke wanted, or she could end this. She stepped out of the shadows, rifle raised. "That is far enough," she said. The men skidded to a stop. The first one, a big man with a scar across his face, started to laugh. "Well, look at this. The boss's little bird. He is going to be so happy to see you." Tessa's hands were steady on the rifle. "He is never going to see me again." "Come on, darling." The scarred man took a step forward. "You do not want to shoot anyone. Just come along nice and quiet, and nobody gets hurt." Tessa thought about her father, about the fire that took him, about 8 months of running, of hiding, of being afraid. She was tired of being afraid. She fired. The shot took the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed, dropping his gun, clutching at the wound. The second man raised his weapon, but Tessa was faster. Her second shot caught him in the leg, and he went down hard. She had not killed them. She could have. Part of her wanted to. But she was not Silas Crane. She would not become him. Luke found her standing over the two wounded men, rifle still smoking. "Tessa." "I am fine." She lowered the weapon slowly. "They are not dead. I am not him." She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading. Luke took the rifle from her hands and pulled her close. "No," he said quietly. "You are not him. You are better." With his men captured or dead, Silas Crane had no protection. Luke and Tessa rode into Carterville at noon, the sun high and hot, the streets full of people going about their daily business. They found Crane in the restaurant of the Grand Hotel, eating breakfast like he did not have a care in the world. He looked up when they entered. His face showed surprise for just a moment before the mask of calm superiority slid back into place. "Ah," he said, "the rancher and his runaway. I wondered when you would come crawling." Luke threw the half-burned letter on the table. "Evidence that you threatened Henry Moran before the fire. Combined with testimony from your men who are singing to the sheriff right now, that is enough for the territorial court." Crane's composure cracked. "Just a little. Just enough. That letter proves nothing. A good lawyer." Tessa stepped forward. "Your men confessed, Silas. About the fire. About the ambush. About everything." She leaned close to him, her eyes hard as steel. "You were so careful, so patient, but you made one mistake." "And what is that?" "You thought I would never stop running. You thought I would never fight back." The sheriff arrived with deputies. There was too much evidence, too many witnesses, too public a scene for anyone to look the other way. Silas Crane was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder, arson, attempted kidnapping, and assault. As they led him away in chains, he looked at Tessa one last time. "This is not over," he said. Tessa met his gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said, "it is." The trial was held in Laramie 2 months later. Tessa traveled there to testify, Luke at her side. She would not let him stay behind, and he would not have agreed even if she tried. The courtroom was crowded with spectators hungry for scandal. A wealthy mine superintendent accused of murder and kidnapping, a young woman who had lost everything and still found the courage to fight back. It was the kind of story that made headlines. Tessa told her story simply, without embellishment. The harassment, the threats, her father's death, 8 months of running, of fear, of waiting for Crane's men to find her. The defense lawyer tried to paint her as a liar, a gold digger, a woman scorned. Tessa answered his questions calmly, her voice never wavering. When she stepped down from the witness stand, Luke was waiting. "You did good," he said quietly. "I told the truth. That is all. Sometimes that is the hardest thing to do." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Silas Crane was sentenced to 25 years in the Wyoming Territorial Prison at Laramie. He would likely die there. Tessa watched as they led him away. She had expected to feel triumph, joy, relief. Instead, she felt empty. And then, slowly, she felt free. After the trial, they traveled to Clearwater. Tessa had not been back since the night she fled. The town looked smaller than she remembered, dustier, meaner. But the mountains in the distance were the same, and the sky was still that impossible blue. Her father's grave was on a small hill overlooking the town. Someone had planted flowers around the headstone. The community, maybe, trying to make amends. Tessa knelt in the dry grass and traced the letters of his name. Henry Moran, beloved father, rest in peace. "I got him, Papa," she whispered. "He is going to prison for the rest of his life." She cried then, really cried for the first time since her father died. All the grief she had been carrying, all the rage and fear and sorrow poured out of her in great heaving sobs. Luke stood a few steps behind, giving her space. He did not try to stop her tears or offer empty comfort. He just stayed close, present. When the storm finally passed, Tessa stood up and wiped her face. "Thank you," she said, "for being here. Nowhere else I would rather be." The next day, a lawyer found Tessa at the boarding house where she and Luke were staying. "Miss Moran," he said, his face serious. "I have news. The community had rebuilt her father's restaurant. It had taken them months, working in secret, wanting to surprise her. Now it stood on the same spot where the old one had burned, fresh paint gleaming in the morning sun. They want to give it to you," the lawyer said, "as a memorial to your father, as an apology for not believing you." Tessa stood in front of the building, speechless. "Moran's Kitchen," the sign said. Just like before. She could stay, rebuild, honor her father's memory in the place where it started, or she could go back to Wyoming, to Luke, to a future that was new and uncertain and terrifying. "Take your time deciding," the lawyer said. "The building is not going anywhere." That night, Tessa lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Part of her wanted to stay. This had been her home, her father's dream. But another part knew that staying would be about the past, about grief, about guilt. Wyoming was about the future, about building something new, about Luke. The next morning, Tessa found Luke waiting outside the boarding house. "You are up early," she said. "Could not sleep." He smiled, but there was worry in his eyes. "Big decision ahead of you." They walked together to the edge of town where the road split in 2 directions, south toward the heart of Nevada, north toward Wyoming. Luke stopped at the crossroads. "I am not going to tell you what to choose," he said. "Whatever you decide, your father would be proud." Tessa looked south, toward Clearwater in the past. She looked north, toward Wyoming in the future. She thought about her father. about how he had always encouraged her to be brave, to take chances, to live without fear. She thought about Luke, about the way he looked at her like she was something precious, about the way he made her feel safe and scared and alive all at once. She thought about what it meant to choose. Then she turned her horse north. Luke's face showed everything: relief, joy, love. He did not ask why. He did not need to. They rode together side by side toward home. Spring came to Wyoming like a miracle. The snow melted. The grass turned green. The creek behind the ranch house ran fast and clear with snowmelt from the mountains. Broken Stone Ranch was thriving. The herd had survived the winter with minimal losses. The crew was full for the first time in years, young men drawn by word of good pay and better food. The cookhouse had become famous across 3 counties, and Luke Carver was happy. He had not known that was possible. Had spent so many years convinced that happiness was for other people, people who had not lost everything, people who had not learned that loving meant losing. Tessa had taught him different. Frank recovered fully, though he moved a little slower than before. He spent his days bossing the younger hands around and his evenings playing cards in the cookhouse, where Tessa kept his coffee cup full and pretended not to notice when he cheated. One morning he found Luke in the barn that Luke had avoided for 9 years, the barn where his father had died. "You are in here," Frank said, surprised. Luke looked around at the familiar walls, the hayloft, the stalls where the horses shifted and nickered. "I figured it was time," he said. "Cannot keep running from ghosts forever." Frank nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud," he said. "You know that, right?" "I hope so. She would." Frank reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring he had been holding for 15 years. "And I think she would want you to have this now." Luke took the ring. Simple silver, worn smooth by years of wear. His mother's wedding ring. "She told me to give it to you when you found someone worth keeping," Frank said. "I reckon you have found her." Luke found Tessa at the creek, sitting on a flat rock, sketching the landscape in a small notebook. She looked up when he approached, her smile making his heart do something uncomfortable in his chest. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "Our ranch." "Our ranch." He liked the sound of that. He sat down beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her body against his. "I had a whole speech planned," he said. "A speech about how you changed everything, how you made this place feel like home, how I was dead inside until you showed up on that worn-out mare." Tessa closed her notebook. "That sounds like a good speech." It was. But when I try to say it, all I can think is this. He pulled out the ring. "Stay," he said. "Forever. Marry me." Tessa looked at the ring, then at him. "You know I am difficult," she said. "I will argue with you about everything. I'm counting on it. And I still have nightmares. About the fire. So do I. About the barn. We will have them together." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said. She slid the ring onto her finger. "Yes." The wedding was simple, held in the ranch yard on a clear April afternoon. Frank stood as witness. Tommy cried. Miguel played guitar. Old Pete made a rare appearance in clean clothes and actually smiled. Tessa wore a blue dress that made her eyes look like the sky before a storm. Luke wore his best shirt and a look of wonder that he could not quite hide. The circuit preacher from Carterville kept it short. "Do you take this woman?" "I do." "Do you take this man?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." When Luke kissed her, the crew cheered. That night they stood on the porch of the main house, which now had curtains and flowers and the kind of warmth that came from being lived in. "Your father was wrong, you know," Tessa said. "About what?" "About love being the enemy. It was not love that destroyed him. It was giving up." Luke pulled her close. "I know," he said. "I think I always knew. I was just too scared to admit it. And now Now I am still scared. He kissed her forehead. But I would rather be scared with you than safe without you. 1 year later, spring came again to Broken Stone Ranch. The herd was bigger, the crew was loyal, the cookhouse was still the heart of everything. Luke stood on the porch in the early morning light, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Tessa came to stand beside him, a baby in her arms. A daughter, dark hair like her mother, gray-green eyes that saw everything. "She has your stubbornness," Luke said. "Good." Tessa smiled. "She will need it." From inside, Frank's voice rumbled. "You two going to stare at the sky all morning? Or is there breakfast coming?" Tessa laughed. "Keep your shirt on, old man." But she did not move, neither did Luke. They just stood there, together, watching the day begin. "I hired her as a cook," Luke said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. 1 season. A simple arrangement. Tessa looked at him. And now she is everything. My reason to wake up, my home, my future. He looked down at the woman he loved, at the child they had made together, at the ranch they had built and fought for and earned. "My father told me love was dangerous," he said. "He was right." But he forgot to mention. Luke smiled, the expression still unfamiliar on his face, but growing more natural every day. Some things are worth the danger. The sun rose higher. Smoke curled from the cookhouse chimney. Horses stirred in the paddock. And on the porch of Broken Stone Ranch, a man and a woman and a child stood together, watching the world wake up. Not because it was easy, because they chose it every single day. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.